Welcome to the firmware extraction video. In this video, we will understand what is firmware extraction, types of firmware extraction, its impacts and preventions. Let's start with understanding what firmware is and its types. Firmware is the software embedded in hardware devices that manage essential functions, such as network connections in routers or printing operations in printers. Unlike regular software, firmware operates directly with the hardware, making it crucial for the device's core functionality and reliability. Types of firmware. There are 3 different types of firmware. Unencrypted firmware. Unencrypted firmware is the firmware which are not protected by encryption, making its instructions readable without any cryptographic security. Encrypted firmware. Encrypted firmware is the firmware which protected by encryption, ensuring its instructions are only accessible to authorized users with the correct decryption key. Obfuscated firmware. It takes a different approach by intentionally obscuring the code, making it difficult to understand using various techniques like renaming variables or inserting improper instructions. Now that we have covered the basics, let's explore the concept of firmware extraction. Firmware extraction is a process which involves retrieving the software code embedded in a device to understand how it operates and uncover potential security weaknesses. This can be done through the 2 different extraction methods. First is physical extraction, which involves directly interfacing with the device's hardware components. This includes the following methods. JTAG interface. We connect a JTAG debugger tool to the device's JTAG pins to read the firmware stored in the device's memory. UART interface. We use a UART adapter to connect the device's UART pins, typically used for serial communication, to access and retrieve the firmware. Chip-off technique. In this, we physically remove the memory chip from the device's circuit board and use a specialized reader to extract the firmware data. The second is software-based extraction, which utilizes the device's software functionalities to retrieve the firmware. This includes the following methods. Firmware update mechanism. In this, we leverage the device's built-in firmware update functionality to intercept and analyze firmware updates during the update process. Remote debugging. In this, we establish a connection between a debugger tool and the target device over a network to remotely access and interact with the device's firmware. Now let's understand, what is firmware reverse engineering? Firmware reverse engineering helps understand the firmware's structure, functionality, and potential vulnerabilities. It involves 2 types, static analysis and dynamic analysis. Static analysis. In this, we examine the firmware code without executing it, identifying vulnerabilities and mapping out functions and data structures. Dynamic analysis. In contrast, it involves running the firmware on a device or an emulator, using debugging tools to monitor its execution and identify issues. Bypassing methods. Bypass update mechanisms. Bypassing update mechanisms can involve tampering with update files, exploiting vulnerabilities in the update process, or targeting firmware update servers to introduce unauthorized changes. Bypass serial debug interface protection. In this, we glitch serial debug interface, which introduces brief disturbances to disable security features, or exploiting software vulnerabilities to access protected interfaces. Tools are used for firmware analysis. Binwalk. Binwalk tool is used for analyzing and extracting firmware images and binary files. Ghidra. It is a reverse engineering tool developed by the NSA for analyzing binary files. Logic analyzers. Logic analyzers are electronic tools used to capture and display multiple signals from a digital system, enabling analysis and debugging. Impacts. Extracting firmware can have significant impacts, as security breaches can occur if attackers exploit vulnerabilities in the extracted firmware, leading to unauthorized access and data theft. Extracted firmware can be modified to include malicious code, compromising device operation. Preventions. Preventing firmware extraction involves both physical and software measures. Physical. This can include removing or blocking connections to serial and debug interfaces and using encryption directly on memory chips to prevent unauthorized access. Software. Software measures involve implementing secure update mechanisms, digitally signing firmware updates with cryptographic keys, using encrypted communication protocols to transmit updates, and employing secure boot mechanisms to verify firmware integrity before loading. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you found this video insightful and informative. At SecurityBoat, we are dedicated to providing comprehensive security solutions and services. From vulnerability assessments and penetration testing to security consulting, we have you covered. Stay tuned for more upcoming videos where we'll delve deeper into a wide range of information security topics and share valuable insights to help you safeguard your digital assets. Thank you once again for watching. Don't forget to explore the SecurityBoat workbook for additional resources and consider leveraging our professional services to ensure your organization's security. Until next time.